Hi, this is Glenda Cedarleaf, and I'm going to read you a story from the work of Charlotte Higgins called The Old Woman and the Enchanted Song. In this tale, we follow Ruth as she is taken on a journey to a far-off place where she is given a gift that eventually changes her life. But before we begin, I invite you to settle into bed and get comfortable in the ways that you know best. Beginning now to let go of the thoughts and feelings of the day and simply let yourself be carried into dreamland by this healing story. Allowing your mind and body to settle as your eyelids begin to feel heavy. As you feel the bed supporting your body, aware of the softness of your pillows and blankets. As your breathing now begins to deepen. As we now begin this tale. Ruth had two sisters, Grace and Jessie. Grace and Jessie played together always, and little Ruth, who was younger than either of them, was left often alone. No one ever stroked her hair, nor kissed her brow, and when she stood by the side of the twin sisters at the gate, and the people in passing praised the flaxen curls of Grace and Jessie, they would then turn towards Ruth, and their smiles vanished. They would regard her with a pitiful air, turning silently away. Then she would creep off by herself into some favorite nook of the garden. Her father never caressed her. His love seemed to be kept for the twins, whose two bright faces peered over his chair, and whose glad voices were always ready to greet him on his return home. And still, Ruth loved her father so much, and nestling close in the corner of the garden away off by herself, she mourned that he never kissed her, nor called her his dear, pretty Ruth. Oh, thought the child, how I do wish I could do something for my father which might please him, so that only once he might call me his dear child. Why was I not made a twin? The poor child mourned to herself. She had a doll which she made her constant companion and with whom she played. She told her doll all her griefs and really came to feel that the doll understood all she said to it. She also had another pleasure. It was that of reading. Her mother had given her many books, and she loved to sit among the rose bushes and read their beautiful stories. She liked to read about a man who lived off alone upon an island and had only some cats and monkeys for his companions. How the cave was his house. How he looked off upon the ocean and saw not one sail, wandered about upon his island without hearing one human sound. This story had a wild fascination for our little Ruth, so she read it again and again. Yet still the book was as new to her in its interest as at first. Then there were other stories she loved to read, some about girls who went out into the world alone to seek their fortunes and returned home with wealth and honor. She often wished she might go forth in this way, so that when she came back, no one would dare call her plain or unlovable. She longed to hold some secret charm, so that whoever she should desire to do so should love and caress her, but still no bright fairy stooped down from the skies to rescue her. One day, when as usual Ruth had found herself quite alone, Grace and Jessie had gone to take a walk, and her mother was reading by herself. She had taken her book and sat down beneath the shade of a broad tree in the garden. She was reading the story of a fair princess who had many suitors and splendid gifts, and who was called the Queen of Beauty. "Alas," she cried, "why was not I beautiful, so I might be loved? Then I should not be the sober, odd thing that I am now." "Would you then so much like to be beautiful, dear child?" said a voice close at her side, and when Ruth looked up, she saw an old woman whom she never had seen before. She was clothed in a long blue dress, and her face was full of motherly love. Ruth's heart was filled with gladness, for seldom had so affectionate a glance been shed on her. And when the old woman bent down and kissed her, how all remembrance of the indifference of father, mother, friends vanished from her mind, and it seemed that her whole life was given to her new friend, that she might do with her whatever she willed. All strangeness at her sudden appearance vanished, too, as soon as she had kissed her. Ruth felt under the control of a great power and watched her movements with as much love as confidence. When the old woman had looked into Ruth's eyes and had seen the thoughts which beamed there, she looked up into the sky and beckoned to a very light, beautiful cloud which was sailing carelessly along. She had no sooner done this than the cloud began to descend slowly towards them, just as though it understood her summons, and when it had reached the place where she stood, it remained motionless. The old woman took little Ruth in her arms and stepped on the cloud and sat down. And after arranging herself and Ruth quite comfortably, she said something which Ruth could not understand, and then the cloud began to rise, moving as easily as it had done before it came down from the sky. While they were going up, Ruth was amazed to see how the garden and the beloved tree below became continually smaller and smaller, and how by and by she could only distinguish the house, and how that became dimmer and dimmer until it entirely disappeared from her sight. Then she turned towards the old woman and saw that her kind blue eyes lovingly regarded her. And so she still more forgot the home below, where without doubt her departure would pass unnoticed. New objects began to attract her attention. The cloud on which they sat did not, like the others, just float over the earth, but it went proudly on and came among the stars and constellation of stars, and she saw how many were clustered together, and no tongue could describe their beauty. And then the deep blue was ever about her, and she saw it away off in the distance, growing to a darker and darker shade, until it became like the air of midnight, while ever from its darkness shone out those immense stars and clusters of stars. Then the most beautiful sight of all was when some star glided past her and shot afar off into the dark blue beyond. There was such dazzling glory in it. Sometimes they would be quite near enough to the stars they passed to discern the people who dwelt upon them, and she felt for them a friendship at once, and only longed that she might go down and tell them so. At last they did approach one bright star, and Ruth saw to her delight that when the cloud had come down into a lovely garden, the old woman stepped off from it and took her up also, and placed her on the ground. Then the cloud, which had been their chariot, and a far better one it was than ever a king had been drawn in, rose upward and began its gentle course in the sky. When the old woman saw how Ruth looked after it, she said to her, "I use all the clouds in that way, more or less, and all those about your earth do many such a service, while the people little dream of it. In fact, everyone there looks down upon the ground too much, and they have no idea of the goodly things they would find if they searched upwards more." The old woman sighed as she said this. Such a happy and pleasant-looking old woman to have sighed so deeply. Then she took Ruth's hand and led her towards her cottage, which was the most beautiful thing you ever could imagine. Without, it had the tints of the mother of pearl, while its framework was of silver. The windows and doors were of diamonds, and there sparkled from them continually all the rich tints of the rainbow. Within, everything was wrought of the finest silver, and the rooms were hung, some in delicate blue silk, others in rose colors. Ruth was entirely overwhelmed with the beauty of the house, so much so as to stand still, looking at the things about her. "You must be tired with your long ride," said the woman. "I wish you to rest well, for there are many things I will show you. After you have rested, I will bring you some food." And with this, she put Ruth upon a sofa and made her lay down to refresh herself with sleep. But Ruth thought in her heart, "Rest? Does she think I can be tired when I have been sitting upon that soft cloud, looking at the wonderful stars? How could I ever be tired or hungry?" But she said nothing aloud, for the charm of the old woman's presence hovered over her, and as soon as she closed her eyes, she fell into a soft and beautiful slumber. Oh, the dreams Ruth dreamed then. Strangely enough, she thought her father and mother, as well as Grace and Jessie, were riding and playing on clouds. And they were all so happy together, and they seemed to love her very dearly, so that in her dream, she remembered nothing of their former neglect. She dreamed how her father called her to him and laid his hand upon her head, and it was such a gentle pressure, and it made her so happy that she awoke, and there really was a gentle hand upon her head. The old woman had made her quickly twine her arms around her neck and hug her. Then the old woman put her in one of the silver-wrought chairs and put before her plates of precious stones, soft, ripe fruit with a delicious flavor, such as she had never tasted before. She couldn't help thinking how glad Grace and Jessie would be to see such before them. And so, at that moment, she looked up and saw the old woman smiling upon her. She took 2 of the most beautiful and the largest of the fruit and put them in her pocket. For she had no doubt but what at some time, all too soon, she would be going back to the earth. The old woman bade her to leave her chair and come to her, upon which she took her in her arms and looked lovingly down upon her and said, "My dear Ruth, I'm going to show you all the treasures which the children upon the earth gather together in order sometime to take with them to heaven. I call their treasures what they love most in their hearts and put into actions. Everything they do or say is kept very carefully, for one day they will want them. So you see, they cannot lose anything. Everything in nature, every cloud that seems only leisurely floating in the sky, is serving some purpose, and all that is done below is born up here." Ruth could not help thinking that the old woman might show her some very beautiful and some very curious things to keep. And in sorrow she began to think what unpleasant things of her own were treasured up to be given back to her someday when she least expected or desired them. But the old woman said nothing about Ruth's things. Taking her hand, though, she led her forth into the garden again. "I'm going to show you some things," said her friend, "and if they seem ridiculous to you, don't laugh at them. For my part, I think it's sad that children will treasure up some very miserable things." They had soon passed into the garden, where Ruth saw the most delicate flowers she had ever seen. They were so tall and nodded their heads gaily to each other. But when she came to a bed of violets, white ones and blue ones, so large, larger than she thought it was possible for them to grow, she stopped to gaze upon them in complete admiration. The fragrance, too, was delicious, more so than those her brother had, although those were very fine ones. "Take some, my child," said the old woman, who watched her delight with a kind of smile. So down upon her knees she dropped and took them, and she could not help thinking how beautiful and lovely a smile would fall upon her from her mother's face as she gave them to her. So the violets, too, were carefully laid in her pocket for her mother. Then they passed out from the garden and came to a gray house. Withered flowers lay about it, while briars and nettle bushes clung to its walls. Ruth feared to pass this place and clung closely to the old woman's side. "Here," said the old woman, kindly putting her arm around Ruth, "are kept all those angry words which children speak to each other and their friends, all their little fretful words when they are impatient and which they will never wish to see again." Then they went on to another house, the walls of which were black, and not a green thing grew about it. "There," said the old woman, "are the treasures of those children who care only for themselves and do not think of others. Those things which they have loved are kept carefully for them, but they'll only tell them of what they have done for themselves." So she opened the door and Ruth looked in. There was a medley of things, candles of gay colors, nice waxen dolls, a great many broken toys, nice fruit, and indeed I couldn't begin to tell you of all Ruth saw there, but many of them had grown tarnished. "You see, my child," said the old woman as she locked up the door, "these things cannot be preserved to look so brightly as when they were first brought here, for they will not last." Then they passed away from the dreary desert places where black houses were, into beautiful plains where the grass was mingled with bright and lovely flowers, and rivulets gracefully flowing along. And here were lovely temples, shining with precious stones, so that Ruth clapped her hands at beholding them. Here, said the old woman, are more beautiful treasures, which are my great glory and delight. She showed Ruth all the smiles ever given to comfort people who had grief in their heart, and these smiles shed about the whole temple a light like a halo. In another were the soft, loving words which many children had expressed and felt in their hearts, and had given others to encourage them when they were sad. Words which they had given and forgotten, but which had yet been carefully gathered up and built in this temple. From this temple, a low sound of sweet music rose. In the sweetness, harmony, it filled Ruth's heart with a perfect peace, as if she had found everything she could ever desire. In another temple were all the gentle, loving words ever whispered to animals. I prize these highly, said the old woman. It is very strange, said she, looking upon the temples, that I find these precious treasures thrown about very carelessly upon the earth. And were I not always ready there, some would be lost. But remember, Ruth, none are suffered to be lost. And so, when the children to whom these belong are going into heaven, they shall find there many a treasure they did not dream of possessing. Thus shall the treasures they had forgotten grow brighter and brighter, while others they had perhaps remembered have grown corrupted in vain. At these words, Ruth longed to lay many treasures in the temples, and she heard a song which the different tones of the temple formed in the air. It melted her heart with its divine harmony. Oh, cried Ruth, could I but sing such a song to my father, he who loves song so well, what joy it would be to him. And would you patiently sing the song, though he thanked you not? Asked the old woman. I desire him to only hear it. And at that moment the power came to her, and such a song poured from her throat. She was so enchanted, but when glancing in the brook she saw her own figure so lit up with beauty as scarcely to be able to recognize it. The old woman saw her amazement and replied, I will send you back to your home, that you may sing this song to your father. And remember, little Ruth, that beauty only is worthy to have, which proceeds from the sweetness of your words and the loveliness of your smile. Send up, then, fit treasures for the temple, and they will be kept safely until you need them. Then, as the tones of the old woman's voice died away, Ruth found herself in the garden again, near her mother's house. And had it not been for the fruit and bunch of violets in her pocket, she would have believed it to be a dream. But when she went into the house and gave Grace and Jessie the peaches, and her mother the big, beautiful violets, and began doing all sorts of kind things for everyone, she felt how very real it had all been. And then, too, she would sing that beautiful song she had heard in the old woman's star, and her father, delighted, caught her up in his arms, kissing her again and again. Ruth did not forget what the old woman had told her, how she might bring the beauty of heaven about her form. Ruth now had peace in her heart. She would sit in the garden and sing and play the softest and sweetest songs, just like the ones she heard on her journey with the old woman. And as she continued to play, new tones and words just came to her. She played on and forgot that the day was passing off. The music brought her to a far-off land and sang of the soft, warm air, of the gently moving waters, and the fragrant blossoms around the banks of the lakes. The moon rose up before her, and she drank from its loving beams. The stars sent down their misty light, as if shrouded because of their great beauty. In that land, she forgot all things else. Soon, an angel of light appeared to her. The angel gave her a deep feeling of peace. All the old fears and doubts were replaced by the love of the old woman, the angel, and the enchanted songs. Ruth felt surrounded and protected by kindness and love. And she now knew this kindness and love was deep within her. And with this awareness, Ruth soon drifted into dream time and into a deep and comforting sleep. And that's the end of our story. I wish you sweet dreams and good night.